Crystal glass cup. George Elliot, a truck driver for a supermarket, returns home. After a midnight shift, he opens the door to his home. Through his living room windows, the morning sunlight shines on a crystal glass cup on a wooden floor. George remembers that all of his crystalware is in the attic. The crystalware is only used during the holidays. He walks over to the cup and picks the crystal glass cup. Looking and turning it, he spotted pink lipstick. Inside the crystal glass cup was something red and black. George smells the crystal glass cup, but it does not smell. He now wonders if someone is in the house. Manhole. George slowly walks to his house with quiet footsteps, thinking to himself, I live alone. My wife passed away many years ago. I have not found a new girlfriend and have no pets. After checking all the rooms and coming to his bedroom, he sees the bed was slept in. George always made it up before going to work. On the bed, an impression of a woman and twisted covers. Now George was scared by what he saw running out of the room. He called the police. They checked the house, found nobody. The crystal glass cup had no fingerprints, only George. George could not have placed the cup on the floor while at work. The police gone by now. George, a large man, stood 6 foot 9 inches, still holding on to the crystal glass cup, walking into the bedroom, standing over his bed, looking down at the woman impression on it, wondering who that impression might be. Manhole. George thought to himself, should I even sleep in my own bed after this? He made some breakfast, while eating, staring at the crystal glass cup, talking to himself. Ask, where could my wife brought the crystal glassware? George remember where the crystal glassware was brought. A yard sale many years ago in a small town of Oakwoods, Florida. After eating, he cleaned all the dishes, even crystal glass cup. George said to himself, why should I let a little thing like this scare me? I'll make up my bed and close the curtains and go to bed. It's be a long way. Yao Sung Yen Ho, laying in bed thinking about his job, also what happened in his house, also asking himself who might be this woman impression on this bed. Sleep came slowly, only sounds of his heartbeats and breathing. George found himself driving a new Yatingo Bak Sam Packard 12 car, going down dirt roads throughout the countryside and forest. Beside him a lady wore Sam in pink dress and high heels, brown hair and eyes, white ivory skin with a sweet smiles. Her name Claire Emma. George's wife, joking and laughing. They drove many miles, talking about many things, and Claire took pictures of the countryside and George. In the small town of Sweetwater, George stopped at a gas station. Claire went inside the gas station to get some pop for herself and George. She asked the man behind the counter, is there any yard sales around here? The man behind the counter had a grey and black uniform, with black hair, strange black eyes and yellow teeth when he talked. He replied back to Claire, in the broken voice, yes, in Oakwood, stay on same road. Yao Sung Yen Ho. Claire paid for the pop, walk out to George's car as the man behind the counter watched get into the car as George paid for the gas. Claire told George about the yard sale in the town of Oakwood, as they drove off from the gas station, also how the man scared her there. She did not want to show her fear at the man at the gas station, telling George as they drove into the town of Oakwood. The town of Oakwood, Main Street, only 3 small wooden buildings, a broken-down diner, post office, and funeral home. As they drove past the funeral home, Claire spotted a yard sale sign. George stopped the car at the house. They both got out of the car, walk up to the tables. They both walk around a few tables, look at everything. As the woman in the dirty dress came towards them from the 2-story wooden house, the woman in the dirty dress asked, what are you young looking for? She only stood about 4 foot 3 inches, next to Claire 5 foot 4 inches, old grey skin, her face covered by many deep lines and green eyes. When she talked, showing gums as her jaws and lips were one dirty bare fit. The woman smelled of snuff and chip beer, no tell what else. She spoke up again, now much louder. You have to speak up, louder to me. As an elder somebody, I can't always hear you say. Yao Sung Yen Ho. Claire spoke back to her louder, now we are just looking for now. George could see in Claire's eyes she felt sorry for this woman in the dirty dress. He also told that they were not going to leave without buying something. George also spotted a man with a rifle in the shadow on the porch of the house. The man in the rocking chair wore blue jeans overall with a checker shirt. He held on to a black rifle, like dancing with a woman rocking back and forth. Shadow from a top that he wore cover his face, only watching in silent. Sounds of old wooden floor creaking below the chair in the rocking movements. The yard walls overgrown with weeds, bushes, and oak and pine trees. House itself stood tall with the worn paint falling off the sidings. Large wooden framed glass windows, some broken by branches from the trees. Beside the house is a Ford group near the man on the porch. George whispered to Claire, "Please hurry up and find something to buy." Yao Song Yen Ho. Claire could tell by the fear now in George's eyes. She now felt it. The woman in the dirty dress took Claire's hand, pulling away from George. Hand of the woman in the dirty dress is small, dirty with open bloody scars, warm to the touch and a feeling of cold. She pushing at Claire, with the little bit of body weight on her. The woman told Claire, "A lady like you shouldn't have the best." Yao Song Yen Ho, pushing now to a rusty old table by that broken fence. On the table a large banana box filled with old crystal glassware. Dirty dress woman told Claire, "This crystal glassware going back far now. Before I was born, my parents said maybe from the old funeral home." Yao Song Yen Ho. Claire asked the woman why she is selling it. The woman in a broken tears eyes voice, "Everyone's gone through that old funeral home during the good times with the depression. Even town is gone." Inside the banana box old crystal glass when it had mold and dirt. Claire asked the woman how much money you want for the crystal glassware. The woman asked Claire young how much you'll carry in your pink dress. Claire had nothing else, called out to George, "How much money do you have?" George walked over to the two ladies and pulled out his wallet. Inside the wallet, George only had $5 left over from paying for gas. The woman's small hand quickly grabbed the money from George's hand. George put his wallet back into his pocket, after that picking up the banana box. Beside him Claire going back to the car, George putting the box in the back seat. As George and Claire began to back up the car to leave, the little woman came out yelling, "Don't stay in this naked part of the woods. You're just in my ought seen in tomorrow morning." Yao Song Yen Ho. They quickly pull away from the house, almost hitting the little woman. Once on the road, George could see in the rearview mirror a Ford group came speeding out from the house that they just left behind. The chase was on. George knew that the Ford was faster than his car. Smelled the dirty rotten banana box and dust. Ashes flew around in the car. At high speed chase over the dirt roads, countryside and rolling hills. George and Claire now here, bullets hitting the car. Claire began to screaming to George, "Faster, faster, we might not make it." Yao Song Yen Ho. The Ford group stopped shooting, only to ram them from behind, jerking George and Claire in their seats, bending the car bumper. Then the Ford group pulled back and started shooting again. Bullets hitting rear lights, spare tire on side of car making a loud explosion. George now hit by a bullet in his right arm, bleeding from it. Claire screaming and crying, she pulled off her pink belt from dress tie to George's right arm to slow down the bleeding. The rear glass window broke by a bullet, then the front window. George saw that they were losing gas, and another bullet in the gas tank would cause a fire. There would be no hope in getting back home. This lasted for a long time, and many miles until sunset. At sunset the Ford group was gone in the dust. They traveled home in the dark. George and Claire called the police that night. They were taken to the hospital. Claire in tears told the story to two police officers. Then one went into George's room. George in pain after having the bullet removed from his right arm. Slowly George's eyes open, look up at this tall man in uniform, the in black uniform with a silver badge and nameplate and a gun at the belt. This man's strong voice, "So are you well enough to be asked some questions?" George's reply to the man, "Yes, but in a lot of pain, please go slow." Yao Song Yen Ho. That the police officer was pleased with George's answers and George went back to sleep. Claire was told by the two officers, a detective will bring them home from the hospital. At home, George and the detective looked over the car and took some pictures. The car had 20 bullet holes and a bent rear bumper. The detective told George, "You were lucky get home alive with all these bullet holes." Yau Sung Yin Ho, detective by the name of Sam Cribb, wearing a neatly pressed brown suit, next to George blue jeans, white t-shirt and tennis shoes. Sam Cribb told George, "I called for crime scene investigators to check the car." Yau Sung Yin Ho, "After car been checked with a report, then you can take out whatever needed." Yau Sung Yin Ho, George told Claire about Detective Sam Cribb said about the car. Sam Cribb told George, "We need to go back to the location where the soul started." Yau Sung Yin Ho, George was scared to go back, but he needed to also find why this happened. It was a long trip back to Oakwood on the country dirt road. In Oakwood they park by Old Wooden Funeral Home next to the house. Detective Sam Cribb radio his location need a story report on a house on Main Street in Oakwood next to the Old Wooden Funeral Home. Yau Sung Yin Ho, George asked, "Why did we not go right to the house?" Detective Sam Cribb reply, "I want to know what type of people in the house, if we might need more help before going up there." Yau Sung Yin Ho, a pleasant woman voice came back on the police radio, calling DSC. Detective Sam Cribb replied back to the radio, DSC, ready to copy." Yau Sung Yin Ho, the radio. The house was built back in late 1800s by the Whitaker family. A few other families lived and died there. No recent owners even going back 1930. Yau Sung Yin Ho, Sam Cribb replied back to the radio, DSC, copy my report. Yau Sung Yin Ho, they moved from Old Wooden Funeral Home over to the old house. Sam Cribb told George, "Stay in the car, I'll be right back." Yau Sung Yin Ho, George watched as Sam Cribb slowly walked through the overgrown weeds and bushes up to porch, then the door. On the porch Sam Cribb spotted a broken wooden rocking chair. He had his gun drawn if needed, slowly opened the door and calling out, "This is the police, come out with your hands up." Yau Sung Yin Ho, Sam Cribb wait for a few minutes then walk into the house. The wooden floors were so rotten he could not make it in all the way. Sam Cribb saw from the living room the second story of the house walls fallen into the first story. The tall house rocked back and forth in the wind. Sam crawled away from the house. Now outside walking around he spots a car. The car walls behind the house, rusting out in tall bushes, fallen tree branches. It was the Ford Coupe. All windows, engine, seats, tires gone by time. Sam Cribb showed George the porch, broken chair and the car. George told Sam, "This is the right house. It was like new when everything happened to me and my wife as I told you." Yau Sung Yin Ho, Sam Cribb replied in moody voice to George, "I have right in my report what we saw today with the investigation, then we're gone it." Yau Sung Yin Ho, George angry replied to Sam, "The bullet holes are real, so the bullet took out of my saws the old crystal glass one in the back seat of my car." Yau Sung Yin Ho, Sam Cribb replied back to George, "Nothing can be done for now, let's go home." Yau Sung Yin Ho, that night Sam Cribb dropped off George at his home, then telling Claire what they saw. She was surprised, and said, "It is real, it did happen or we would not be here." Yau Sung Yin Ho, 2 days went by. Sam Cribb called George, "It's okay to have your car repaired, and to take anything out of it as you need to." Yau Sung Yin Ho, George replied back, "Is anything going to get done about our case?" Sam Cribb came saying, "Still under investigation, we'll call you back." Yau Sung Yin Ho, Claire first had George get the rotten banana box with the old crystal glassware out of the back seat and take it to the outside of their house for cleaning. George set the box down by the hose while Claire got a bucket of soap. This would be the first time she will see what the crystal glassware looked like. Everything in that box smelled of dirt, mowed sour rags and dead rats. Claire removed the rags from the wind, blew all that dirt and mold into face. She could not see or breathe, by dirt in her eyes and mouth, nose. By running the hose in her face she cleared most of it out. Claire saw the box full almost to the top with the crystal glassware. After all the trouble they went through, she would not throw out the crystal glassware, and thinking of high price value it might have, she was amazed at each of the crystal glassware, how old that it might be. Washing each one being so busy, time went by and feeling sick, yet Claire did not want to give up on her treasure in glass. By this time the box started to fall apart by the water. If the break so would, the crystal glassware fall out and break. Claire slowly had to take one crystal glassware at a time. She did not wear any gloves or nothing for her face. All kinds of bugs, worms crawling around the box or on the grass and her, in the soapy water in the box. Something large bite her hand. Claire quickly pulled her hand out of the box, a coral snake hanging onto it. Screaming, calling out for help. Nobody came out in the neighborhood. She sprayed the snake with water from the hose, then bit it with the hose. After 10 minutes, Claire laying on the ground, the snake broke free from her hand. In shock, she could not move, her body wet. What little feelings were left, feeling snake crawl around over her body, then all the bugs, worms, and maggots. Claire's body now being eaten by bugs, worms and maggots. She stared at the sky, remembering what the little woman said in Oakwood. Don't stay in this naked part of the woods, you Justin Mikan ought seen in tomorrow morning. Yao Song Yen Ho. Claire's eyes closed for the last time as she took her last breath. George returned home after being there at car repair shop all day. It was around sunset. George walked around the house calling Claire, I am home, Yao Song Yen Ho. He went to the outside of the house, spotting Claire's lifeless body wet and covered with bugs, worms, and maggots. George's screaming and crying for her, yet nothing could be done. He ran back into the house and called the police, telling what he saw with Claire. That the police set up 2 spotlights on the side of the house, put it on Claire's body. They robot the area with police tape, called for medical examiner. Crime scene investigators showed up, also Detective Sam Craig. Police took pictures Claire's body. Another report was made. Medical examiner took away Claire's body and the rotten banana box. Also were the bugs, worms, and maggots leaving the crystal glassware. Detective Sam Cribb spent even more time with George. George in tears asked Sam Cribb, what now? He went on to say, do you believe me now? Everything is true for what has happened. Yao Song Yen Ho. Sam Cribb's words were, do not go inside the police tape until told. Yao Song Yen Ho. It was around 1 a.m. when all the police and the detective Sam Cribb left. 2 days went by. The medical examiner called George. He said that Claire died from the snake bite. She also had mysterious dust in the eyes and lungs that came from the banana box. Yao Song Yen Ho. George replied to the medical examiner, thank you for your time. Yao Song Yen Ho. A month went by. The police tape was gone. Claire's funeral came and passed. George had finished cleaning all the old crystal glassware only using during good times, always remembering his wife, and how they got the crystal glassware. Now 2 years went by, nothing was ever done about all the police reports on George and Claire. With all that had happened, George needed some of his questions answered about this old crystal glassware. He had to go back to Oakwood's house for the answers. Before he go to Oakwood, he needed to learn about old crystal glassware. George spent another year going to many libraries learning on crystal glassware. He traveled back to Oakwood. The diner, post office, and funeral home now gone. At the Oakwood's house, weed and brushes covered the house and fallen trees. The 2-story house, now the 2nd story, has fallen down on the 1st story. George parked his car in the yard of the house so it could not be seen from the road. He searched the yard first, going back to where the Ford Coupe stood. The Ford Coupe now only a metal frame, the car's body gone in thick weeds. George need find anything to who the car belonged, and trace down the person. Searching through the weeds and bushes around the car, he found numbers off the metal frame. Away from the frame, a trash pit and a rusty tag with numbers. The numbers on the frame and tags was very hard to read. He wrote down the numbers on the frame and tags in a little notepad. George searched even more in the trash pit for anything to get the name of anyone who lived at the house and what they did. In the trash pit it was only ashes and dirt. He feared going into the house that it might fall down around him. Nobody knew that George would come back to the house again by himself. Before going inside the house, he found a tree branch that could be used as a club. George searched around the outside of the looking for the best way into it. The old wooden house moaned, groaned, creaked in the wind. He found a back bedroom window to get into the house. Inside the bedroom, the house moved back and forth in the wind, moaning, groaning, creepy sounds louder throughout the house. The bedroom smelled of rotten wood, moldy dirty clothes and death. George had a feeling that he might be watched by someone or something, yet he could not see anyone or anything that might be watching him. Looking around the room, he saw an antique bed and dresser knock over. George slowly walked around the bed to the antique dresser. Next to the dresser a large oval mirror, broken glass all over the floor. He could not walk on the floor. The wood was too soft, only the framing of the floor. George used his stick to press on the wood where it might be safe to walk. Slowly he made it to the fallen dresser, which was broken up, moving the stick around in the pile moldy dirty clothing. The dirty clothing was of a man and woman, of the late 18th batches. George thinking to himself, I might be in the master bedroom. Looking around the room, spiders' webs, large bugs crawling all around. Nothing was found in the clothing, no signs of any papers on the floor. George slowly walked to the bedroom's door into a small hallway. In the hallway the broken railing and staircase fallen into first-story floor. Large piles of wood in the center of where the staircase once stood. George saw two other doors, a small wooden ladder to the attic. The hallway was filled with large rat-size of cats roaming around for anything to eat. It smelled so bad George could hardly breathe. He had to keep on going. George now had to fight off the rats, while trying to make it to the next door. He kicking and beating hard at the rats, sweat flowed like tears. The fighting of the rats stirred up dust and dirt into a heavy fog. Rats' blood and guts went over everything, even George. He could hardly see by the dust and dirt. Still beating at the rats, George had to feel his way across the wall until reaching for the other door. He had tried beating at the door to close it, killing more rats until closing it. George knew now how bad he must smell with covered by rats' blood and guts. A greyish white of thick dust and dirt stick to him like a second skin. His breathing hard like a newborn baby trying to take its first breath. George's eyes, half blinded by the thick dirt in the air. He had to find something in a hurry to clean his eyes in the room. George reached out his arm to get a feel for how large the room was. He made only half turns, not knowing why he might trod. Taking half steps in the turns, he was able to tell the room was very small. A slow dripping sound could be heard at his feet. He knew now that this was the master bedroom bathroom. George smiled, then laughing, talking to himself, this is the first time I ever had to fight to get into a bathroom. He got down on his hands and knees, feeling around on the floor. Going to the dripping sound, George could feel an edge of an old tub. George's eyes, still closed by all the dust and dirt, could feel water in the tub. The water smelled worse than well water, no telling what was in it. He had to wash out his eyes just so he can see again. George made a cup with his hands, splashing water to his eyes, little bit at a time, splashing again. Whatever was in the water hurt his eyes. Slowly he began to see how small this bathroom really was. The toilet and sink gone, fallen through a large hole in the floor. Bathtub hanging on the floor, wooden frames on the edge or fallen through. The tub greyish white, dark brown and black ring covered in inside. Little bit of water in the tub had dark green algae, bugs and maggots. Mold and spiders' webs covered the bathroom walls. George found a very small glass jar. He had to fill it with the dirty water, so that can keep his eyes clean enough to going into the other rooms. After filling the glass jar, George covered his mouth with his t-shirt. He put the small glass jar into his shirt's pocket and putting it. Slowly he opened the bathroom door. Rats rushing, biting at his feet. George's swing his stick, beating the swarm of rats off just to get into the hallway. Blood and guts flew all over him as he was killing many rats. The air stirred up thickened dirt and dust into a blinding mist. As many rats he killed, more kept on coming, even now biting at his legs. He could only sidestep along the wall to the next bedroom. The next bedroom. In the thick mist, George opened the door yet could not go in. George, still fighting the rats at his feet, the bedroom he could not enter, had completely caved in into itself. Nothing left of the room. George, slowly moving past a stairway, looked like it might go to the attic. Still beating at the rats as he moved into last bedroom, he hurried to close the bedroom door to keep out the rats. His eyes blinded again by the dust, dirt, blood of the rats. George pulled out from his shirt pocket the little glass jar of water, holding close to each eye, letting drops of water clearing his eyes, putting the jar back into his shirt pocket. Looking around, another broken bed and dresser all over the floor, George found a old candle and stick, also a box of matches. He put the candle and stick into his pants pocket. Bedroom walls looked it they cave in at any time. George knew that he could not stay in this room long, that the pain throughout feet and legs it was getting harder to stand. He stood screaming and crying, yet he had to keep moving on. Moldy clothes all over the floor. George searched through them, found nothing. George slowly walked over to the open broken bedroom window, trying to take in some fresh air. It was very hard to breathe in, smell throughout the house. He could not even smell the fresh air. Looking out in the yard, the trees dancing in the strong breeze, the clouds turning from white into grayish-white to black. Sounds of thunder and lightnings could be heard. The house rumbled with the loud thunder moving in. A light rain began to fall, then with a heavy downpour. George quickly moved away from the window. He had to get out of this bedroom and work his way to the small staircase. Opening the bedroom door again, swarm of rats rushing after him, swinging his stick and beating at the rats, inching over to the small staircase. At the small staircase going up to the attic, rats followed his every move, blinded again by sweat, tears, dust, dirt, rats' blood and guts, baiting at every stair, deeping the rats off as he climbing the stairs. Reaching the attic door, he quickly opened it. More dust and dirt blew on him. Closing the attic door, George, now in darkness, only a little bit of light came through in small holes in the roof. In the darkness, George pulled out the glass jar from his pocket and cleaned his eyes. It was the last of the dirty water from the bathroom. Up here he could feel the strong shakes throughout the house even more. The little bit of light. George pulled out the old candle and stick, then the matches. A stiff breeze blowing through the attic made it hard to light the candle and 3 matches before it worked. It was very hard to walk around with floor rocking hard back and forth. In the dim candlelight, George saw some wooden toys, chest, and clothing. George set down the candle next the wood and chest. Looking inside, it was a girl's hope chest, with yet-tinted buttons up his dresses, a small hand mirror, hairbrush, earrings, a golden necklace with a painting of a little girl wearing a yet-tinted dress. Next to the golden necklace, a yet-tinted newspaper with a head with crystal glassware, a little empty wooden box where the toys, fallen out of. It looked like it might be watertight, so George put the newspaper hat and the golden necklace into, then put it his pants pocket. The storm outside grew very intense with every passing hour. Before George knew it, a loud deafening crashing sound. The second floor suddenly shifted forward, the crashing downward, collapsing, flattening the whole house, attic, and roof. George now laying on his back, knocked out from the collapsed house. He laid there for hours, covered even more dirt, dust, now broken wood. The storm kept on raging on with heavy rains, thunder and lightning. Bugs started eating at George's flesh, yet he could not beat them off. Blinded again, pile of dirt all over him, also small broken wood. It was now dark outside. George could hear the pouring rain and thunder. He was trapped in a very narrow crawl space between the attic floor and the roof. George thought to himself, have I caught myself and made my own coffin? Nobody knows I am even here. Is this how I'm going to die and be forgotten? A bright power light flashed in the far corner away from George, so bright even with George's dirty eyes could see it. Lighting struck on the center far side of the house only for a second. George felt the high electrical shock going through his body. He screamed from the pain, then woke out again for 2 more hours. George came awakened again with numbness throughout his body, this time just barely feeling the bugs still eating at his flesh. George started smelling smoke coming from the bottom of the house. Human survival kicked in with George, even in this narrow crawl space. He told himself, I made it this far, in sharp pain not going to let myself die. So Song Yun Ho. In total darkness, George remembered how close he was to the back of the house, placing his hands on the floor, pushing up his back, sliding his legs a few inches. Being trapped, he only had a few inches to work with between the attic floor and roof, the smoke getting thicker. George started coughing and now feeling the heat. Below he could hear the swarm of rats running out of the house, the flames causing the wood to explode, sending burning ashes through the attic floor, burning parts of his shirt, arms and hands, yet he kept on crawling. He could not see the flames, now reaching up the very back attic floor, burning through roof, spreading rapidly through the house. The heat now was getting intense, his breathing almost gone by heat and smoke. George finally reached the back attic wall. Kicking out the side wooden panels, he knocked out 2 large paneling, and being able to turn his body along to the wall, George could not see for sure the wooden paneling was gone. Reaching to with his hand, feeling that they were gone, the flames coming up near him, the roof now covered the roof, he crossed his arms, hugging himself, then rolling out of the attic, hitting the ground and the wooden panels hard, rolling into the wet weeds, crying out in pain from the fall and all bloodily bites over his flesh, now feeling the intense hit as house burns down beside him. The light rain slightly clear his thick dirty eyes in the darkness, a great glowing orange from the fire and the only hit for his wet cold body. The fire slowly burned itself out. George now laid in total darkness. Cold sweat and chill and numbness took over his body. Thirsty for water, George turned over and licking the grass for water, only getting little drops at a time, and tasting more of the dirt and dust from the house and smoke deep in his lungs. The shock of everything that had happened inside the house. He could not move, his body kept telling to slip, yet George knew he had to get better. George slowly fallen asleep, hearing movements in the weeds and bushes. Small animals did not get near. To George, smoke from the house still blowing on him. A thick early morning dew covered the ground and George, the dew cleared his eyes and wet his lips, using the tongue to licking lips. George could see the house gone, nothing but a pile of black wood. Black and grey ashes cover him, his clothes bloody by bugs, rats' bites. Even with all the pain, George felt happy just to alive for another day. He could not stand, only able to slowly crawl around in the weeds and bushes. The brightness of the daylight hurt his eyes, the shadows from the trees help. It's so very hard to see through the weeds and bushes when crawling. George stopped crawling, too much pain. He lay on his back, closed eyes, then sleep. Something broke his right side of his body, slowly opening the eyes. A tall man in a dark green police uniform stand over him. Did the police officer call out to George, "Did you start the house fire?" George could not speak. The police officer could see that George covered with ash, dirt, mildew and bloody clothing. That the police officer had trouble breathing. George smelled so bad. He turns over George and handcuffed him as he cried out in pain. George could see the police officer walk away from him. The officer called for backup. The other officers showed up. Sound of siren and ambulance. By now George passed out from his pain. George opened his eyes and, one hand in handcuffed to a bed. He was in a narrow small room with only a window and one light, a toilet and a small sink and one door. George clothing gone, only a hospital scarf. George tried to get name of the hospital off the scarf. He was in too much pain. A blanket covered him, but he still had hot and cold chills. George could hear the door to his room being unlocked. Sounds of 2 men walking into the room, talking low as George lay quiet. One man in a deep, powerful voice, "I am Officer Harris Blakely, who found this man next to a burnt down in Oakwood." "Yo, Song Yun Ho," The man is under a bike act and not to leave this hospital unless by court order. Yao Song Yen Ho, the other man in a mild voice replied back to Officer Blakely, I am Dr. Robert Soltek, MD. This man is a John Doe until we can find out who he is. The man has fractured bones throughout his body. He took in a lot of smoke, dirt, dust inside the lungs. Lucky that he can still breathe. There were also bugs and rat bites on his arms, legs, torso. Another half an hour the man was not found. He would die. Yao Song Yen Ho. George could feel the doctor check him and leaving sound of dog clothes and look. He knew his status. Nothing could be done for now, only to do whatever they say. A lot of questions he would have to answer to keep out of any more trouble. George was pleased at getting the medical care and not know where he is. Munho. He laid quiet as George could only listen to the sounds and voices from the door. Dr. Robert Soltek asked a nurse, did the police take George's clothing? A nurse replied in a gentle voice, yes, only leaving his wallet. Yao Song Yen Ho. Dr. Robert Soltek came and said to the nurse, only give him soft food. Yao Song Yen Ho. George turned his head looking around the room, one light over his head. On each side of his bed two small tables, one a bedpan, another a water jug and cup. As he laid thinking, how could I get back from the police took from him? Munho, if the police can tell me something about what was found from the house. Munho, he turned back his again, look at the water jug, the name of the hospital on it. The name of the hospital's Sanctuary Mental Hospital. George's eyes opened wide in his express in shock of being here. In time he might find out the reasons and a way out of here. His pain throughout body, nothing could be done for now. Sound of a key unlocking his door and woman's shoes walking toward him. A nurse stood over his bed. Slowly George opened his eyes. He could feel her taking his wrist and checking pulse. George could read her silver name when it did not flash in his eyes. Her name Kelly Stevens. She caught George staring at Kelly and smile. Kelly looking down at George, deep set dark hazel eyes. George's olive skin with traces of grey and black ash from the fire. His hair dirty blonde with grey streaks, traces of age lines around the face. Kelly could tell he was about 6 feet tall, medium build. George felt like she was an angel standing over him. At 9 p.m., George's alarm clock rang loudly, waking him from a deep sleep. George woke up now. What a nightmare. Walking out to the living room, George stopped the crystal glass cup on the floor again. He remembered cleaning it and putting the cup away. The cup had the same pink lipstick on it, in the bottom something red and black. He had no time to check out the cup anymore. George had to eat and go to work. While driven on his job, he thought about the cup and the old house.